Greetings and welcome to another edition of the Agile Uprising podcast. I'm your host. You know who it is. I'm done introducing myself. And this is an unscripted episode, which is the first time we've done it in our Metaphors Matter series. And who else to join me but my frequent collaborators along this journey, Mr. Joel Zienstone.
Hello.
I got the last name right 2 shows in a row. Hooray for me.
Did.
Third time I get a prize. And Mr. Mike Cadell.
Howdy, y'all.
Greetings, gentlemen. So the topic of hand, even though this is unscripted or unstructured, we're going to discuss, we talked about moving to a more organic type of metaphor in lieu of mechanical. And one of the ideas that came up, or one of the terms that was thrown around in a chat, it was probably a week or so ago, was the idea of a placebo. And my question, the crux of this episode is going to be a discussion around the idea of, is Agile a placebo? Does the placebo effect come into play when we're trying to do transformations? Is it the equivalent of a sugar pill? What if we treated transformations like they were a placebo? Would we get better results? So I'm going to start off by defining what a placebo is, and then I'm going to go to you, Joel, to start ramping up your thoughts here. So for those of you that aren't aware, a placebo is defined as an inactive substance that looks like the drug or treatment being tested. The placebo effect is when an improvement or symptoms is observed despite using a non-active treatment. So anybody who's aware with control groups and test groups, when it comes to level 3 double-blind studies of pharmaceuticals, one group gets the actual drug, the other group gets the placebo, then they compare the results to see how effective is the actual drug comparatively to your brain telling you, oh, I'm on a drug, this is going to work. And then maybe if we have time, there's the fourth question of what is the power of positive thinking, and maybe placebos are our best bet. So I'm going to start with you, Joel. What are your initial thoughts when I tell you Agile is a placebo?
So much. So I did a little light Googling today in preparation for this, and I was surprised to learn a couple of things. So I had previously read a lot about the placebo effect and the positive impacts that it has, and as well as placebo's use in medical studies and how in order for a treatment to be considered effective, it oftentimes needs to outperform a placebo. What I didn't know, and this is interesting, is that placebos are never allowed to be used in a study if it would mean putting people at risk by not allowing them to have effective therapy.
Really?
Really.
So how do you effectively test like a cancer drug?
Well, so for example, in cancer clinical trials, placebos are almost never used.
Wow.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
So in cancer, in those sorts of things, what they do is they just have a control group where no treatment is given. They're just allowed to continue on to do their thing.
Huh.
So the reason that's interesting to me is the question is Agile a placebo? I think the answer is certainly maybe, right? And I think how it's oftentimes presented to and put into practice in organizations is certainly very placebo-like, right? A good example we see probably almost weekly, Mike, in our Discord. We see examples of organizations who implement Scrum or SAFe, but completely keep everything else the same, right? So they keep their component teams, they keep their they keep their leadership hierarchies the same, their decision-making processes the same, and they expect to see results, right? And in those sorts of instances, Agile is very much like a placebo, right? It's actually not doing anything, right?
Actually,
But-
I counter that it's doing something, but it's maybe not doing what it was thought to do.
Fair. In the
Placebos
same,
interesting. Placebos versus unintended consequences. Okay, we can go back to that. Okay, continue.
but like a placebo, it could actually still have positive impacts because of the placebo effect, right? Where by believing that it'll help, it helps, regardless of whether it actually takes care of or addresses root causes or not, right? But when thinking about that, you guys know that one of the things I'm very passionate about is the idea of treating agile coaches like doctors and the ethical responsibilities that come along with that, right?
Mhm.
And this idea of placebos are never allowed to be used in a study if it would mean putting people at risk by not allowing them to have an effective therapy. That means ethically, if we know that Agile is going to be a placebo someplace, maybe it would be unethical for us to allow that to take place.
So I want to go. So I got to take a note here. I want to get some of Mike's thoughts. But then I want to go back to the question of how would we know it would be treated like a placebo? But Mike, so what are your initial thoughts on this topic?
Couple thoughts. Firstly, the placebo effect, as I understand it, is happens when the placebo triggers our brains to either perceive things differently, or in some cases to process neurological signals differently so that we don't feel pain. Or if anyone's a MASH fan, there's a MASH episode where they run out of pain medicine. They give all the people who have been injured and operated on sugar pills, and everybody's feels better. So that's all the brain, you believe it's going to help, and then your brain could I say tricks itself into thinking that it's actually had a positive effect. So quote agile, big agile, to rib Joel a little bit. Sometimes I think does have that effect in that there's activity, and activity can easily be confused with progress. There's different actions, and as a result, organizations feel like the things are better because they're different. There's sometimes some beneficial side effects to that placebo, if you will. And I think the darker side of that is that giving a ineffective treatment to an organization that desperately needs something very effective is kind of maybe doing it some harm, because it takes the attention away. You think you're making progress, you think you're doing something to move forward positive. Maybe it's dressed up in the language of incremental iterative improvement, which, by the way, I'm a firm believer in, but that can also be, like many things, can be misused. So maybe some cases it can be harmful. Some cases it can actually give you a little bit of benefit. Jay, over the years, we've heard people talk about, if you adopt the agile practices without really changing the way you think, what you value, how you believe, you'll get a 5 to 8 to 10% improvement. It's possible that 5 to 8 to 10% improvement is in part from the placebo effect. I don't know.
Yeah, because in studies with placebos, generally you do see Now any doctors listening will just completely murder me probably, but I think I did read somewhere that it was like 5 to 10% improvement from the placebo effect in many cases, you know.
Yeah, and the rest of the story there is straightforward changes to practices without necessarily getting the essence of an agile mindset, and can have a positive effect. So it may be like taking a Tylenol when you need morphine. You get a little bit.
Right.
A good example, a client I'm working with currently for years has had struggles with a particular product, and no one ever figured out why. They were organized into a Scrum-like team, and the simple act of making all the work visible brought to the surface and made it undeniable that there was a lack of clarity in priority and direction, and they had to fix it. So maybe the smaller dose of medicine can do some good.
So but now you got me thinking, Mike, if we don't know that us showing up on the scene and agile is a good or a bad thing, maybe do we want to start with the placebo and see if it takes hold? I mean, I know this is kind of probably people are listening like, I got Jay's a terrible person. But maybe we start with handing out the sugar pills and tell you, yeah, just start doing this, you'll get better, trust me. And if they do start showing signs of responding to the sugar pills, that's where we double down. But if I give Joel the sugar pills and he say, I don't feel shit, maybe is that an early warning? Is that a leading indicator that maybe we should go somewhere else because they're not ready for it?
So
I guess my question is a positive placebo effect an indicator of a positive mindset ready to absorb or not absorb to entertain a change?
I think
this is terrible audio, but I either broke Joel's brain or he's trying to put the words together.
You broke my brain.
Yeah, I'll jump in here, Joel. In some limited cases that might work. There's so much more at play with the dynamics of human perceptions and change that, pick a number 1 out of 17 that might be a good leading indicator. In the other 16, again, just make up the number that I hypothesize that would lead you maybe to results you don't want. Kind of like giving a placebo to somebody who really needs a strong drug.
Why would you give a sugar pill to a diabetic, Jay?
I'm thinking out loud here. I'm thinking out loud here.
So where my brain went,
part of it.
where my brain went when things froze up was there is a lot of accusations out there in the medical community that doctors just default to handing out Z-Packs like candy, antibiotics, et cetera, right? But then I went back in the chain even further, and it was like, well, no, even then they still diagnose you first, right? So before you wouldn't just hand out sugar pills without diagnosing what's wrong first.
Fair.
And then you might say, well, the appropriate treatment for this might involve Scrum, and maybe the very basics of Scrum is almost like a sugar pill, but it's a very light dose, and we increase the dose of the treatment as we go, or something like that, right? It's not necessarily that, but I don't think ethically I would feel comfortable knowing that I am prescribing or advocating for something that I know is going to have no real impact on the organization.
Or maybe it will. Run 2 sprints and call me in the morning. Is that what we're saying? But you also, you made a remark earlier, Joel, that I want to go back to you. you were talking about the attempted agile transformation or digital, whatever kind of transformation you want to talk about here, the attempted organizational change. Sometimes it takes, sometimes it doesn't. And then you ask the question of, well, how would we know of what's happening? Or how would we know what's happening if it's a placebo effect or if it's truly, I guess, inculcated, right? The idea, the mindset, how do we know if it's a placebo or if it's inculcated into what the culture of the company that we're working with, the organism, I should say.
You'll know over time, just like with a pill. You withdraw the pill, and are you better? Then, if the cure sticks, then you were cured. If you withdraw the pill, then and it comes back, then
Okay.
So this is something that you've heard out of me a lot, and that is the reason we know, well, it'll turn into something you've heard a lot, but the reason we know something is a placebo is that we've thoroughly tested it. We know it's not harmful, and we know it doesn't do anything to the body, right? When we know that a medicine isn't a placebo, it's because we've tested it. We've thoroughly documented it. The results are repeatable, the results are documented, and it performs better than something we know is a placebo. Right?
Right.
So I think that ultimately what's missing from our industry, and this is where it's something you've heard me say before, what's missing from our industry is the real peer-reviewed studies that prove out those ideas, right? That prove out those treatments, those identifications of diseases, this will help this part of your organization, or this will help this aspect, right? All we have is a bunch of self-reported case studies, right? We've got some groups out there that have done a better job than others at trying to document improvements in delivery and other things, but that's like, I think there's one group I've seen out there that even tries to do that, and they don't really drill down into specific practices, specific changes in leadership. They don't isolate the variables. They don't publish those sorts of large studies with that degree of fidelity, right?
Okay.
And in the world of medicine, that level of rigor is how we trust that an antibiotic is going to work. That's how we trust that a placebo is going to give us a placebo is a placebo, right? That's how we define all of that knowledge. What we've got right now are a bunch of medical shaman running around saying, "Here, buy my snake oil."
Yeah, we really do. Yeah, we really do. So I want to kind of play around with this analogy, this metaphor a bit more, right? So if the placebo is basically it's junk, it's snake oil that you're giving to someone to tell them it's going to work. And some people it works and some people it doesn't. I'm still stuck on the whole, if I start working with somebody and I can tell that it's the placebo for them is eliciting a change, do you swap out the placebo for the real thing, or do you just keep going with it and lean into it?
It depends on the condition of the patient.
I mean, it's kind of an so let's say and I know like our brains are automatically going to cancer, right? Cancer and heavy pharma drugs, because that's where our brains go. But say if it's something as, you know what, Dr. Joel, I don't smile like I used to. And I think I might be fighting some sort of, like, I don't know, seasonally afflicted personality disorder because I'm in New Jersey and it's rained for 6 goddamn days in a row and I feel like I'm in Portland. Maybe you turn to me and you say, "Hey, try this. Take 2 of these. Let me know if it works." And not only does it work, I turn into like a different person. Like, it really worked. What do you do at that point? Like, what does Dr. Joel do?
So
does he lean into it and give me more of the Smarties masquerading as real pills? Or
so one of the interesting things about the placebo effect and why we don't rely on it medically is that most often that effect is temporary. So most often the placebo effect doesn't cause long-lasting change, right?
Okay.
So the like, and that's medically speaking. I'm not talking about the power of positive thinking or any of the adjacent placebo conversation out there in the TED Talk world, right?
Okay.
But from a medical perspective, most often the placebo effect is temporary in nature. So you know from an ethical perspective, if a placebo helps, that it's most likely temporary and that they're going to go back to the way that they were. And so from an ethical perspective, if I was looking at that, I would probably say, well, we need to switch them over to something that will truly help, right? But the reason that is important is because when it comes to studying data with placebos, there's the idea of single blind studies and double blind studies, right? You've heard those terms?
Yep.
So a single blind study is when the patient doesn't know that they're on a placebo. That's the minimum required for them to have the placebo effect. Because if they know that there's a placebo effect,
Right.
not going to, or that they're taking a placebo, nothing's going to work, right? The problem with single blind studies and why you don't really hear about them being relied on is that the researchers, if they know who's getting a placebo and who's not, they're more likely to try to switch somebody who is sicker over to the real treatment, right?
Right. It may subconsciously or unconsciously impact their MO of treatment, some of those choices they make. Yeah.
Right. So the highest fidelity of studies are often called double blind studies, in which case, at which point, neither the patients nor the physicians treating them know who's on a placebo versus who's not on a placebo, right? Because of that very problem. If you see somebody who's sicker or needs it more or who is improving from the placebo, your instinct is to try to give them the real thing to try to improve them, right?
Right.
So it's a long way of saying, yes, I would fall into that trap very easily.
So there was a thread I was just bouncing around in my head and I kind of lost it.
While you're searching for that, Jay, Joel, something you were just saying triggered a thought in my mind. Going back to something you mentioned at the outset, is at what point does using, kind of placebo agile, if you will, become unethical?
So
can we start by defining what placebo agile would actually be? Like if literally the three of us, if it was Mike, Joel, Jay, Inc., and we were hired by some corporate customer to help them with their transformation, and we decided consciously we're going to give them the placebo, what does that look like?
Taco agile.
Just the taco?
Just the taco. Titles and ceremonies only.
I agree, and I would probably add on to that, limit the scope to teams. Teams only.
Okay, so you're really doing, so by our definition, you're not doing anything with mindset, anything with principles. It's really just, it's a branding and activity exercise. Okay.
So I would also amend that to say that if that were a reality, like if we were really doing that, we would have spent some time really researching and trying to figure out truly what is a placebo, not a Friday night or a Tuesday night conversation.
Right.
But yeah, my gut would say probably taco and at the team level only, where almost none of the root causes of most of the problems that organizations face are at the team.
Okay. So now
in
go
that
on, Mike.
case, do you, Joel, in your view, would that be ethical or or in what situations might it be ethical or unethical to?
So I gotta be real careful here, Mike, because
because I want to get a job eventually someday again.
well that and the vast majority of our listeners, let's face it, are in what we just described, right? And so I don't want people to walk away feeling less hope than they coming into the conversation, right? So I don't want to call our audience base unethical is what I'm trying to get to, but I would say that it becomes unethical at the point in time that you know the net effect of what you're doing with the organization is neutral or less than neutral, right? If there's a placebo effect, then it becomes unethical at the end of the expiration of the temporary boost, right? And I think we've seen a lot of placebo effects come along through the years outside of Agile. Lean gave a temporary boost to many organizations. Six Sigma gave a temporary boost, and then a year, 2, 3 years later, things slowly started to go back to how they always operated, right? And I think we see the same thing in Agile, where we come up with these huge transformations, and then a few years later we observe that all of the changes that we made eroded, or the language changed, but how the place operated didn't really change, right?
Is that an inverse placebo?
Yeah.
Where the body basically takes the functional drug and says, yeah, it's just not working for me anymore.
Yeah. Actually, I
Go on, Mike.
want to push back on that with a little different perspective, Joel.
Sure.
That no dispute, methods, ways of working, fads, whatever you want to call them, they're many, varied and distinguished, and you articulated quite a few. To put it into the biology analogy or metaphor, I'd say it's kind of like I go to the for a checkup, I get a calcium heart score, and I blow a 750 on the Agatston scale, and go to my doctor and go like, Doc, I'm gonna have a heart attack next week. And the doctor says, well, see a nutritionist, change how you eat, start exercising, take this statin, well, don't eat as much salt, lower your blood pressure, do all these 17 things, and that will reverse and improve your health. And then I go out and have 5 beers and a steak and a ice cream sundae that night because I took the drug that the doctor told me to. Using the biology, the body health metaphor. The dynamic you're describing occurs to me is more akin to that than not, and there's variations, and every situation is a little different and all, but it's not so much. Lean has a lot of good stuff in it. It's just misapplied.
Oh,
and
absolutely.
It's frequently thought of as, this is the answer. All I got to do is this, and I'm done. And I remember, 10 years ago, checkbook Agile was a thing. Write a check to somebody, will make me Agile, and the world is my oyster. So that's getting beyond the methods and into human behavior.
And I don't disagree with you at all, Mike. We've had that exact same conversation in some of these other podcasts as well. So I'm 100% with you.
Yeah.
I want to ask Mike a question while we're on the topic of placebos and Agile placebos. If we wanted to create a leadership placebo to get leaders to act differently, what would that look like?
Servant,
Is that even possible? What did you say, Joel?
servant leadership?
You just made me
Harsh.
think about it, right? So we talked about the idea of oh man, that really just kind of sunk in. Woof.
Sorry about that. I couldn't contain myself.
Took a second for those gears to kind of clink in. So we talked about the idea of an agile placebo. Is it ethical? Is it unethical? What if we wanted to change some leaders? And and they're not buying what we're selling. So we want to kind of juice them by giving them, oh, take one of these. See if this makes you smile more. Right back to our same patient who's now a leader. Is there such thing as an agile placebo?
For leadership?
Leadership placebo, not agile placebo. Leadership, yeah.
I imagine there could be in just thinking out loud, the nature of the leadership style and the values and beliefs in the organization would likely influence what would be effective as a possible placebo. It's a little different. I just thinking this through out loud. It's a little different problem. It's, I guess there would have to be some possibility of it, but nothing's really coming to mind.
Yeah, I'm not really. And as I said it out loud, I'm starting to think through, and I don't even know if answering my own question. I don't even think there is. Well, I'm not in this short term. I'm not really thinking that there's anything there that's actually making it relevant. So, gents, again, this is an unstructured, unscripted show. So we've been going out for about 35 minutes, bouncing this idea around. Let's take it home with some final thoughts. I'm going to start with you, Joel. Final thoughts on the idea of Agile as a placebo.
I think anything that we can do to keep working towards effective, proven out treatments for organizations who are sick and who are injured is good, right? I think we should be constantly turning a critical eye to the methods, the ideas, the treatments that are being offered to us as coaches, to us as practitioners. And I think we should be constantly asking the question of, how do you know this works? And if the answer is, well, I've seen it work, then or I've seen it work in a lot of clients, then I think we need to really question, is that the placebo effect? Is that just anecdotal self-reported evidence? How do we know? What level of scrutiny are you really applying to those claims? And I think the more of us that do that in the industry, the higher standard our lovely snake oil salesmen / shamans are going to have to be held to, right? Because if we look historically, those people, the successful ones, ended up discovering drugs, proving them out with the scientific process or the scientific method, and becoming the pharmaceutical industry today, which has to meet fairly high standards to prove something works, right? Now, there's a whole other podcast on the good, the bad, and the ugly of that, right? But generally speaking, we trust medicine, right? And I think that we have the opportunity as practitioners, as agile coaches, to start to hold these leaders, these companies, these groups to that standard by asking them to prove out that this stuff works at a higher level of fidelity. And I think ethically we have the responsibility to do that. So that's kind of my long way of saying, of closing out that from my perspective, that the idea of the placebo is really only valuable to us to consider if it helps us drive our industry towards a higher level of care, you know?
Fair enough. Fair enough. Mike, final thoughts?
Yeah, so the question that we started with, is Agile a placebo? Listening to the conversation, kind of taking it all in, I land on the side of it's not really a placebo. Sometimes it's taken and it plays out with placebo-like behaviors, but it's not. There's really not. There's not shortcuts to different results. But with all that being said, being aware that the mind is an amazing thing, and the focusing the mind or the collective group of minds can have awesome transformative results. And the path to that is to continually find the questions that are helpful and appropriate for that moment, for that group of human beings in that organization. And that asking the right questions, being curious, experimenting and learning is where we can get beyond the snake oil that Jay-Z here mentioned.
You two said it perfectly. I don't have anything to add other than to agree with you, Mike, that reality is nothing more than a shared delusion amongst all of us. And the mind is a powerful thing. So you can get a lot of mileage out of just, change your mind, and mind over matter really does help. So again, I want to invite all of our listeners, all of our fans. This is a thread we're pulling on, and we're not really sure we created anything groundbreaking, but we are having a conversation. So if you are interested in this conversation, please hop into the Discord. We are having these types of chats more and more often. So please, if you think we missed something, if you have a better idea, the idea of a placebo, you think you can add a little bit more meat to that bone, please hop into the conversation and let us know. We would love some new voices and some new faces. So on behalf of myself, I want to thank Joel and Mike for taking time to sit in on this episode. On behalf of Joel, Mike, and myself, I want to thank all of you listeners for tuning in once again. Find us on Discord, find us on the internet, find us on Twitter, blah, 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 blah. Shout out to Krebs and Machine Man Records for this outro music free of charge. And until next time, this is the Agile Uprising podcast signing out.